My name is Rowena Hale, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had control over my life. I was 33 and attending ER physician at St. Bridget's Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. I'd worked harder than anyone I knew, graduated top of my class, pushed through the toughest rotations, survived residency with nothing but grit and caffeine. My shifts were brutal, my sleep erratic, but I loved my work. I saved lives. That mattered. What I didn't know was that everything I had built, everything I trusted, was about to be turned against me. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I had just wrapped a triple shift, 42 patients, 1 fatality, 2 crash codes. I remember standing by the nurse's station, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring blankly at an open chart. My vision tunneled. My legs buckled. The last thing I heard before the floor rushed up to meet me was someone shouting my name. I woke up in a bed that wasn't mine. At first I thought I was still in the hospital. The sheets were white. The ceiling tiles were clean, but the room was too perfect. There was soft instrumental music playing from an overhead speaker, and the window didn't show city buildings. It opened onto trees, pines, mountains. I blinked slowly. My head felt like it had been filled with wet cotton. A gentle knock at the door. A woman walked in. Mid-40s, crisp, white uniform, practiced smile. "Good morning, Dr. Hale," she said warmly. "Welcome to Evermere Wellness Retreat. You've had a little episode, but you're in safe hands now." I tried to sit up. My limbs felt heavy. My throat was dry. "What happened?" "You collapsed at work," she said, placing a glass of water on the nightstand. "Your family was very concerned. They brought you here for rest and rehabilitation. No pressure. No decisions, just peace and healing." I blinked again, processing. "What?" "Hospital. Why not St. Bridget's?" She didn't answer that. Instead, she handed me a small white pill and smiled. "This will help ease the fog. Just something mild. Everything's been arranged." I didn't take it. Instead, I asked the one thing that suddenly made my heart start to pound. "Where's my phone?" She kept smiling, but the warmth dimmed a little. "We've placed all electronics in secure storage for now. No distractions while you heal. I need to speak with someone." "Of course," she said calmly. "Once you're medically cleared, you'll have access to communication, but for now, let's focus on getting you stabilized." She left the room before I could form a proper protest. I looked around again. The bedding was luxury cotton. A pitcher of infused water sat beside the glass. The framed print on the wall read, "Sometimes healing means letting go of control," but it didn't feel like healing. It felt like containment. The next 24 hours passed in a strange fog of scheduled activities. Breathwork, journaling, silent meals, group mindfulness. Every time I asked for contact with the outside world, my hospital, my lawyer friend, Ellis Brewster, even just my email, I got the same soothing dismissal. "Not yet." The staff called me by my first name in a tone that sounded more like a kindergarten teacher than a medical professional. No one used their last names. No one wore ID badges. I asked again to speak with a doctor. They told me I had already been evaluated and that any medical decisions were being handled in consultation with family, which was odd. My relationship with my father, Dr. Clive Hale, had been complicated for years. Since my mother died, he'd remarried a woman named Genevieve. All charm and ambition and magazine feature smiles, and gradually I'd been pushed to the outer orbit of the family dynamic. I hadn't even spoken to my half-brother Silas in over a year, so why were they suddenly so involved in my medical decisions? By day 3, my suspicion turned to quiet alarm. I asked to leave the facility, They said I wasn't cleared to make that kind of choice yet. I demanded to see my medical records. They told me they were confidential for my own protection. I requested to sign a refusal of treatment form. They smiled and said that might come later once I was of sound enough mind to make such decisions. That night, I couldn't sleep. My window overlooked a quiet pine grove surrounded by high fencing. My door didn't have a lock, but I noticed it clicked softly at night, magnetized from the outside. I wasn't resting. I was being held. The next morning, I was led to a one-on-one therapy session in a room that smelled like lavender and resignation. The therapist, A soft-voiced woman named Maureen smiled as she asked me to draw a representation of my emotional state. I asked for a phone. She offered colored pencils. Later that afternoon, I managed to slip out of a guided walk and wandered toward the main office building. I passed a long hallway lined with frosted glass rooms, and through one partially open door, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. It was my stepmother's voice. "Genevieve." "No, we haven't told her about Matilda's passing yet. She wouldn't handle it well in her current condition." Then a pause. "I understand. But the trust won't hold if Rowena's still legally competent. We need the evaluation finalized." Another voicemail clipped answered. "Once we submit the conservatorship request, the assets will be frozen. You said she hasn't accessed any of it?" "Of course not," Genevieve replied. "She's too sedated to ask questions. Give it another few days." I stood there, pulse-hammering hands, trembling. Matilda, my grandmother, the only person in my family who had ever truly understood me. I hadn't spoken to her in over a month. My shifts had been chaotic, and I'd meant to visit her that weekend, and now she was dead, and no one told me. I backed away from the door before I could be seen. My legs felt weak again, but this time, not from exhaustion. It was betrayal, icy and complete. They hadn't brought me here to recover. They hadn't brought me here to help me heal. They had brought me here to erase me, because Matilda's estate, her home, her savings, her legacy, was going to me. And now, with one medical file and one court order, they could make it theirs. But what they didn't know was that I had heard everything, and I had no intention of staying silent. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the narrow bed, heart pounding against the thin fabric of my gown, eyes fixed on the red glow of the wall clock. 2:41 a.m. The hall outside was quiet except for the occasional squeak of rubber soles on polished floors and the low hum of fluorescent lights. My mind was racing. Genevieve's voice echoed in my head. "She's too sedated to ask questions." And the lawyer's reply, "Once we submit the conservatorship request, the assets will be frozen." That wasn't the language of concern. It was strategy. I wasn't a patient here. I was a pawn. They were going to steal everything my grandmother left me, and all they needed was for me to stay quiet long enough to be declared incompetent. I pushed back the covers and sat up slowly. My body still felt sluggish, like my muscles were a second behind my brain, but it wasn't fatigue. It was chemical. They were medicating me. I stood and tiptoed to the small ensuite bathroom, flicking the light on low. My reflection in the mirror startled me. Pale, dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back into a loose braid. I didn't look unstable. I looked like someone who had been cornered and drugged into submission. There had to be a way out. In the morning, the staff came in for their usual wellness check. They called it that, but it was more of a gentle shakedown, temperature, pulse, medication confirmation, and a reminder of my scheduled therapy opportunities. I smiled, nodded, played along. I'd seen enough psychiatric holds to know how quickly resistance could be labeled as paranoia. After breakfast, I asked one of the aides, an older woman named Maris, with kind eyes and an overly chipper tone, if I could use a phone to call my hospital and let them know I wouldn't be in. "That's sweet of you, dear," she said, adjusting the throw on my lap. "But your father already contacted them. You just focus on getting better, all right?" She patted my hand like I was a child. Later, during our creative reflection hour, we were instructed to write a letter to our future selves. I asked the facilitator, a young man named Theo, what would happen to the letters. "They're sealed and returned to you during discharge," he said. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I replied. But now I knew where the security gaps were. I tucked the letter I wrote inside my sleeve. It was blank. But it bought me time out of the main wing, and I needed that. At lunch, I started observing patterns. 3 main staff were always present: the woman who called herself Director Celeste, the nurse supervisor Maureen, and the man in the suit Ronan, whose job was unclear but who always seemed to be hovering just behind the real decision makers. He rarely spoke, but he watched everything. I also began noticing the others, the residents, not patients. That word never passed anyone's lips. There was a woman in her 50s named Lana who spent every morning weeding the herb garden in silence. A young man barely out of his teens who only spoke in quotes from old movies. A mother of 3 whose name I never caught, who paced the walking path for hours but never spoke to anyone. And then there was the woman in the corner during group breathing. She had a scar along her jaw and eyes that never blinked when spoken to. She sat cross-legged, motionless until someone told her to move. Her name tag read, Carla. At one point during our circle check-in, she looked straight at me and said flatly, "The more you pretend, the easier it gets. That's what they want." The room went silent. Theo tried to redirect, but Carla just stared at me until we were dismissed. That night, I returned to my room and locked the bathroom door. I took the pill they gave me at bedtime, then spat it into a tissue and flushed it. I didn't care what they saw on the cameras. Let them watch. Let them wonder. By the 4th day, the fog in my head began to lift. My limbs felt steadier. My thoughts sharper. I stopped trying to explain things and started listening instead. During a watercolor workshop I hadn't signed up for, I caught a quiet moment with Theo. "You ever get the feeling someone doesn't belong here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up from a stack of brushes, hesitated. "I'm just here to help people find peace," he said, not answering the question. Sometimes peace looks like surrender. That's not always a bad thing, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Doubt. Later that afternoon, I sat under a sun lamp near the glass wall of the atrium. Carla passed me, dropped her paintbrush, and bent to pick it up. She whispered as she rose, "Room 6, midnight, East Wing. Ask for Ivy." Then she kept walking. I turned slowly and watched her disappear down the hall, paintbrush now clutched like a weapon. It was the first crack in the wall, the first sign that I wasn't alone. The clocks in Evermere didn't chime. That was part of their philosophy, timeless healing, they called it. No schedules, just rhythms. But I had learned to count the passing hours by the quiet shift, changes, the sound of food trays rolling down the hall, the flicker of lights dimming at night. By midnight, I was dressed in the same pastel uniform they gave all residents, pacing softly in my socks. The hallway outside my room was silent, lined with soft floor lights and motion sensors that triggered low glows if you moved too quickly. I waited until the cameras turned. There was a blind spot near the atrium exit. I'd timed it. My heart was hammering. Room 6, East Wing, midnight, ask for Ivy. I didn't know what I was walking into, but after 4 days of playing compliant, I was done waiting for someone else to save me. The East Wing was different, quieter. No art therapy rooms, no cheerful murals, just offices and closed doors. Room numbers printed in small brass plates like a private hospital ward. Room 6 was near the end, its window dark. I raised my hand to knock and hesitated. What if this was a trap? What if Carla had sent me here to get flagged as non-compliant? What if they were testing me? But something about Carla's eyes, the way she said Ivy's name like it was a lifeline, pushed me forward. I knocked once. Soft. Silence. Then click. The door cracked open. A woman peeked out, maybe early 40s, dark curly hair tied back in a low knot, wary eyes behind thin gold glasses. "Rowena," she whispered. "Come in. Quickly." I stepped inside and she shut the door behind me, locking it fast. The room wasn't a patient room at all. It looked like a storage office converted into a tiny break-space filing cabinets on one side, a worn desk, and a second-hand recliner in the corner. Ivy motioned for me to sit. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she turned a small white noise machine on the table beside her, then pulled the blinds. First, she said quietly, "Tell me everything you know." So I did. I told her about overhearing Genevieve on the phone, about the word conservatorship, about not being told my grandmother had passed, about the medications they'd been giving me without consent. When I finished, she rubbed a hand over her mouth and exhaled slowly. "I had a feeling," she said. "About what?" "About you," she replied. "I've been watching you since day one. You don't move like someone in crisis. You move like someone trapped." I leaned forward. "Who are you exactly?" She gave a small, ironic smile. "I'm the night shift charge nurse. I came here a year ago because I thought Evermere actually helped people. Most of what we do is just expensive spa therapy for wealthy families who want to detox their guilt." She hesitated. "But every few months, we get someone like you, like me, lucid, grounded, wrongfully placed, and always with family behind it." That sent a chill through me. Why haven't you said anything? You think I can walk into the director's office and accuse the Hales of medical fraud? You know who your father is?" My jaw tightened. Of course I knew. Dr. Clive Hale wasn't just a renowned physician. He sat on boards, taught at medical conferences. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and rewrote the rules. "And your stepmother," Ivy added. "That woman could charm a boardroom full of wolves. So what do I do?" She looked at me serious now. "You fight like hell, quietly, smartly, and you document everything." She stood, went to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a slim tablet wrapped in a leather case. "This isn't part of the system," she said. "It's mine, personal. You can use it, but only here. No Wi-Fi, but you can type notes, take photos, record." She paused. "And I have a contact. Someone outside." My breath caught. "A lawyer. Not just any lawyer. You mentioned the name Ellis Brewster. He's been calling here for days trying to reach you. They keep telling him you're in deep recovery and can't be disturbed." I gripped the arms of the chair. "I need to talk to him. I need to know what they're trying to take from me." Ivy nodded. "I'll get him on the line tomorrow night. Safest after midnight. Until then, play the game. Don't let them see you pulling back." I took the tablet from her and held it like a fragile promise. "And Rowena," she added softly. "Whatever happens, don't eat or drink anything they hand you directly. Not unless you know what's in it." The weight of her words settled in my chest. Why, I asked, already suspecting. Because this place doesn't just sedate. They erase. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a tiny foil-wrapped chocolate from a bag labeled staff only, and handed it to me with a wink. "Eat this instead. It won't help your sleep, but it'll remind you you're still human." We sat in silence for a moment. The clock on her desk ticked to 12:47 a.m. I rose to leave. She walked me to the door and whispered, "You're not crazy, Rowena. And you're not alone." I stepped into the hall and the tablet pressed to my chest, the chocolate still clenched in my hand. The corridor was dark and still. The walls felt closer now, like they were listening. I walked back to my room, slowly rehearsing my expression. The mask I'd need to wear tomorrow. The words I couldn't yet say. The performance I had to perfect. Because now I had something I didn't have before. Proof. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay still in bed, my fingers brushing the hidden tablet beneath my mattress, the foil-wrapped chocolate still on the nightstand, untouched. I hadn't eaten it. I couldn't. It felt like a symbol, and I wasn't ready to break it. In the dim light of early morning, I slipped it into the drawer with a quiet sense of reverence. A reminder that I still had agency, still had allies, still had time, though I had no idea how much. By breakfast, I'd perfected my smile. I played my role mild, grateful, maybe a little foggy. I complimented the herbal tea nodded through breathing exercises, even painted something forgettable during art therapy, a hill, a house, a sun. Something innocent. Something harmless. Something they wouldn't question. But behind the smile, my mind raced. I had one goal now survive long enough to speak with Ellis, to confirm what I already suspected about Matilda's estate, and to make sure whatever my family was planning, they wouldn't get away with it. By midday, I spotted Carla again. She was in the garden, squatting near the lavender bushes, her face streaked with dirt and sweat like she didn't notice or didn't care. Her eyes locked with mine briefly, then shifted back to her work. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She'd sent me to Ivy. She knew. That afternoon, we were taken on a mindful nature walk along the fenced perimeter of the Evermere property, an hour-long circuit with guided silence and optional reflective journaling at the halfway point. I lagged behind, intentionally waiting until we paused by a cedar grove where the scent of pine and decay hung thick in the air. Carla stood a few feet away, turning the pages of a blank journal. "Thank you," I murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. She didn't look up. "Don't waste it," she said quietly. "Have you been here long?" Carla's lips twitched. "Time doesn't mean much here." There was a pause before she added, "They say I tried to walk into the lake on purpose. They called it a self-harm attempt. But the lake was frozen." She turned to face me then. Her eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. I remember every second of it. But they told me I was confused, traumatized. that I didn't know what I was doing. My stomach turned. They rewrote your story, I said. She nodded. They always do. How long have you been here? Carla smiled, but it was hollow. I stopped counting after 2 birthdays. I swallowed hard. The implications were staggering. She wasn't a patient. She was a prisoner, just like I would be if I didn't get out. They used someone like you once, she added. A woman before me. Smart. Sharp. Her family didn't want her to have power, so they brought her here. What happened to her? Carla looked away. I don't know. One day she was in room 12, the next day she wasn't. No discharge, no goodbye, just gone. That night I couldn't stop thinking about that woman. Room 12. Gone. Like smoke. I waited for midnight with the kind of sharp, focused tension that makes time crawl. When I heard the first rotation of the night shift, I crept back to Ivy's office, tablet in hand, heart tight in my chest. She was already there. I reached him, she whispered before I could speak. Ellis! She nodded, locking the door behind me. I called his private number, told him you were safe for now, but needed confirmation on your grandmother's estate. And she handed me a slip of paper with a name and email address. He's sending a file tomorrow. Sealed password protected. He wants to verify everything before speaking directly. He's worried your line might be monitored. That made sense. My father wouldn't leave anything to chance. I sat down in the chair opposite her and opened the tablet. Do you think I can trust him? I asked quietly. Ivy studied me for a long moment. Then she said, He's not part of this place. That's enough for now. We didn't speak much more that night. I typed out everything I remembered the call. I overheard the names, the phrases. I listed every time I'd been given medication without informed consent and everything Carla had told me. I included the story about the woman who vanished from room 12. Every detail might matter later. By the time I returned to my room, the sun was beginning to rise. I watched it from the window, pink and silver light spilling across the trees. I used to love sunrise. It meant hope, new beginnings. Now, it felt like a countdown. Because if Ellis confirmed what I feared, that the estate had been left to me and only me, then I knew why my family had locked me away, and I knew what they were willing to do to keep me quiet. It was just after noon when Ivy slipped me the USB drive, wrapped in a folded napkin, no markings. She slid it into my palm during lunch like it was nothing more than a sugar packet. No eye contact, no small talk, but my pulse spiked the second I felt the weight of it in my hand. I waited until evening, until the therapy groups ended, until dinner was cleared, until the halls grew quiet and the cameras turned in their lazy, predictable rotations. Only then did I make my way to Ivy's office tablet, tucked under my sweater drive, hidden inside my sock. She met me at the door, said nothing, just locked it behind us and drew the blinds. We plugged in the drive. The file was password protected, just like Ellis promised. I typed in the code Ivy had written on the corner of a napkin, ELGR Trust 12. The screen blinked once, then it opened, and I saw my grandmother's name in elegant black serif, Matilda Eliza Hale, last will and testament. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me couldn't believe this was how I would hear of her death. Not through a phone call, not through tears or family, but through a document delivered in secret, passed from lawyer to nurse to tablet under threat of surveillance. I scrolled. There was a note from Ellis at the top, Rowena. I tried to reach you multiple times by phone and email. When I finally contacted your father, he informed me you had voluntarily entered a wellness facility for exhaustion and grief. I knew something felt wrong. Your grandmother named you sole beneficiary, not partial. Not shared. Sole. Everything is yours. Please contact me the moment you're able. E.B. I swallowed hard and kept reading. The will was clear. Matilda left me. Her primary residence a 3-story craftsman home near the Hawthorne Bluffs, a lake cabin in Crescent Bay, a condominium in San Diego which I didn't even know she owned, over $9.7 million in diversified investment accounts, plus residual royalties from her poetry publications and 2 art endowments she had co-funded in the 1980s. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was more than I imagined, more than I ever thought she had. But then came the part that made my fingers tremble. She had explicitly excluded my father, Clive Hale, and his wife, Genevieve. And she'd done it in writing to my son, Clive, and his wife, Genevieve. I leave nothing, not out of malice, but because I have seen their values and they do not reflect mine. I entrust Rowena with the care of my legacy, as she alone has shown me love without conditions. I blinked hard. Ivy leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. She really did this, I whispered. She did, Ivy said. And they've been trying to undo it ever since. I scrolled to the final page. A scanned copy of a letter written in my grandmother's familiar looping cursive. My dearest Rowena, if you're reading this, I am no longer with you. I hope you are safe. I hope you are strong. I know the people closest to you have tried to silence your voice, but I want you to remember something. Truth always outlasts control. This inheritance is not a prize, it is a shield. Use it to build the life you want, not the one you were told to accept. And know this, if you feel like the walls are closing in, you are not imagining it. Be careful. Be brave. Love always. Grandma Matilda. I sat back in the chair and let the weight of it settle. She had known. She had seen it coming. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't delusional. My own grandmother had anticipated that my father would try to twist her legacy and she'd put protections in place to keep it out of his reach. I glanced at Ivy. Her face was pale but steady. They tried to say I was unwell, I murmured, that I couldn't manage my life, all while hiding the fact that my grandmother died and I was her only heir. Ivy nodded. And now you know why they're moving so fast. They don't want you to see this. They want you declared incompetent before you can claim anything. My hands curled into fists. I won't let them. We backed up the files to Ivy's personal drive, encrypted them with a second password, and stored the originals in a zip folder marked Wellness Intake Forms. A decoy. Just in case. As I was leaving, Ivy placed a hand on my arm. There's something else, she said, a pattern I've been tracking. When these kinds of cases come through high-profile families, big estates, the patient usually disappears within 3 weeks. Disappears, transferred, long-term hold, private facility, somewhere far less visible. My mouth went dry, and how long have I been here? 11 days. We stood in silence, the tablet heavy in my hands, my mind already calculating the clock. I had less than a week before they moved me someplace I couldn't escape. Somewhere, Ellis couldn't find me. Somewhere I'd stop being Rowena Hale and start being a diagnosis with no rights and no voice. I turned to Ivy, my voice quiet but firm. I need to get out of here. She didn't hesitate. I know. 11 days. That number rang in my ears like a countdown. Ivy's words from the night before had lodged somewhere beneath my sternum. High-profile cases don't last more than 3 weeks. If they were planning to move me to some long-term care facility where I'd be tucked out of sight and stripped of legal authority, it would happen soon. I had to get out before they did. But getting out of Evermere wasn't like leaving a hospital. There were no visitors, no unlocked exits, no casual checkouts. You didn't go home with a balloon and a doctor's note. You left in silence, or not at all. I spent the next 24 hours laying the groundwork with Ivy. We had one shot and everything depended on subtlety. The key was misdirection. They can't stop you if they don't know you're gone, she said, brushing a stack of staff files into a drawer as we spoke in whispers. If we create the illusion of a late-night transfer, something routine, non-emergency, most of the night staff won't even question it. We worked out the plan, step by step. At 2:15 a.m., Ivy would input a false update in the internal system, labeling me as temporarily transferred to Evergreen Facility Family Requested Evaluation. She had access to the scheduling platform and enough seniority to slip it through without alerting the director. At 2:25, I'd be escorted by Ivy through the staff entrance dressed in neutral scrubs and a medical mask. Ivy would be logged as the transport nurse. At 2:30, I'd be picked up by a rideshare under a false name arranged by Ellis and paid in cash. He'd be waiting at a safe house outside Portland. The only variable we couldn't control Ronan, the man in the gray suit. He wasn't listed on the official staff page. He didn't lead therapy groups or monitor meds. He simply appeared observing, taking mental notes, always hovering behind the director during group briefings. We didn't know what he was, but we knew he was watching, so we kept rehearsals to a minimum. I continued playing the perfect resident, compliant, calm, a little dazed. I took the pill cups, slipped them into tissues, flushed them down the bathroom sink. I smiled at Maris during art hour, nodded politely at Theo during our mindfulness walk. And when Ronan passed me in the hallway that evening, offering a silent nod, I returned it with practiced neutrality. He didn't slow down, but he looked back, just once. That night, I barely breathed. Ivy met me at the staff utility corridor at 2:10 sharp, her expression tighter than usual. She wore a navy fleece and carried a clipboard, the picture of an overnight nurse on shift. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded, my pulse thudding behind my ribs. "It's now or never," I said. She handed me a folded pair of scrubs and a surgical mask. I ducked into a supply closet and changed, quickly stuffing the wellness pajamas into a linen bin. The mask was oversized enough to hide the lower half of my face. My hair was tucked into a surgical cap. I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Perfect. Ivy tapped her watch. "Let's go." We moved fast, but measured like professionals on a job. The staff hallway was narrow, dimly lit, and lined with mop sinks and locked equipment closets. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic. At 2:25, we reached the staff exit. Ivy swiped her badge. A soft beep, then a green light. The door clicked open. My breath caught as the cool night air rushed in, pine-scented, crisp, unfiltered, the outside world. It had only been 11 days, but it felt like a year. The parking lot was empty except for one vehicle idling in the far corner, a nondescript black sedan. The driver wore a ball cap and didn't look up. "That's Ellis's guy," Ivy said. I turned to her. "You've done more than I can ever repay." She gave a small smile. "Just promise me something, anything. When you get out, don't forget the others still stuck inside." I swallowed hard. "I won't." Then her face changed, eyes over my shoulder. "Rowena," she said too quietly. I turned. Ronan. Standing in the hallway just beyond the door, his expression unreadable. He didn't shout, didn't reach for me, just watched. Ivy stepped between us. "Is there something you need?" she asked coolly. Ronan said nothing. He just stared at me, then at the clipboard in her hand. I held my breath. 1 beat, 2. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the corridor like a ghost. We didn't wait. I bolted toward the car, Ivy right behind me. The driver stepped out, popped the back door, and nodded. No questions. I climbed in, heart-hammering, and shut the door. Ivy gave one last glance behind her, then pulled the door closed. "Go," she told the driver. "Now." As the car rolled down the narrow private road, I twisted to look out the back window. Evermere receded behind us, its sleek white walls glowing faintly under the moonlight, its windows blank and silent. I exhaled for the first time in days, but it wasn't relief. It was adrenaline. I was out, but I wasn't free. Not yet. The car drove for almost 2 hours before I realized I hadn't spoken a word. I sat in the back seat, legs folded tightly beneath me, still dressed in hospital scrubs, surgical mask tugged under my chin. The sky outside shifted from black to dark blue, the horizon threatening sunrise. But I wasn't watching the sky. I was replaying the hallway. Ronan's face, his silence, his eyes tracking Ivy's clipboard like a machine running calculations. He let us go. And that terrified me more than if he'd tried to stop us. At 4:17 a.m., the driver pulled off the highway onto a wooded road just outside Portland. We passed a mailbox labeled Thomason Farm, then turned down a gravel lane where a small 2-story cabin sat in the shadow of tall pines. Waiting on the porch was Ellis Brewster. He looked exactly how I remembered him from med school, clean-cut khakis and a hoodie with the energy of a man who read fine print for fun and didn't sleep unless someone reminded him. As I stepped out of the car, he came toward me quickly but cautiously. "Rowena," he said softly, eyes scanning my face like he was checking for cracks. I nodded once. "Still me." He exhaled and pulled me into a careful hug. "You look like hell," he muttered. "I feel like I've been run over by a truck full of betrayal." He cracked a smile, but only for a second. "Come inside. There's a lot we need to go over." The cabin was warm and smelled faintly of cedar and something comforting coffee or cinnamon. A folded blanket lay across the couch, and a laptop sat open on the kitchen table beside a stack of folders. He poured me a mug of tea without asking. Ivy told me everything he said, or as much as she could safely say. I took the mug, sat on the couch, and stared into the steam. "She saved my life," I murmured. "She's a damn hero," he agreed. "And she's not alone." Turns out, Evermere's got a long list of guests who mysteriously lose access to their assets shortly after admission. But let's start with what we can prove. He pulled a folder from the table and sat beside me. I subpoenaed some documents quietly after Matilda's passing. Her accounts, trusts, estate records. There were a few red flags, transactions that didn't match her usual patterns. I thought it might be grief-related. Now I think otherwise. He opened the folder and turned it toward me, a printed bank statement. 5 weeks ago, a $475,000 withdrawal from one of Matilda's accounts. Authorized Ellis said by someone claiming to be you. I stared at the signature line. It said Rowena Hale, but the handwriting was off. Too rounded, too careful. "Forgery," I said flatly. Ellis nodded. "They routed the funds into an intermediary shell account, then into a family trust under the name S.G. Hale." I blinked. Silas. Ellis handed me another sheet, a business registration for a consulting company in Nevada. No actual services offered. No staff, just a name and a tax ID. My stomach flipped. "They were laundering your inheritance before you even knew she was dead," Ellis said. But how I asked. Even with forged documents, banks require in-person verification IDs. He gave me a tight smile. They had help. Someone on the inside. "Your father's old partner, Dr. Emery Lee, now a board member at Pacifica Private Wealth. The same firm Matilda used for her investments." I set the tea down slowly. "This goes deeper than I thought." Ellis hesitated. "There's more." He tapped on his laptop, pulled up a scanned prescription record. "Your name, your birth date. 5 consecutive prescriptions for lorazepam, dosage increasing each month." I stared at the screen. "I never took lorazepam." "I know, but the pharmacy records say otherwise. Filled under your name. Picked up in person by someone using a temporary ID." I reached up, touched my lips. "The tea," I whispered. Ellis turned to me, eyes sharp. What Genevieve made me tea every time I saw her. Chamomile, lavender. She insisted it helped me slow down. He was already pulling up another file. "Toxicology panel from a hair sample Ivy helped collect before you left." He didn't have to say it. I saw the report. Traces of benzodiazepines consistent with sustained microdosing. "They were sedating you for months," Ellis said, "creating a paper trail of instability, so that when the time came, they had proof you were slipping. Delusional, unsafe." I felt nausea rise in my throat, cold and slow and paralyzing. "They were building a case for conservatorship," I said. "Exactly." I pressed my fingers against my temple, trying to process the layers of betrayal, the scale of it, the cold precision. "This wasn't just greedy," I whispered. "This was clinical, like a long game." Ellis's jaw tightened. "They knew Matilda trusted you. They knew she would leave it all to you, and they knew she wouldn't live forever. So they started early. They set the stage." I stood up and paced to the window. The trees swayed gently outside, indifferent to the truth unraveling inside the cabin. I turned to face him. "Can we stop them?" "Yes," he said with a calm that felt earned. "But we need to move quickly. They'll be filing for conservatorship any day now, probably through a third-party firm to keep their hands clean. And the money Silas already took, I've frozen the trust account. It'll take time, but we can recover most of it. What matters now is protecting the rest and proving you're mentally competent before a judge." I laughed bitterly. "I'm a licensed physician. I literally make life or death calls. And now I have to prove I'm not crazy." Ellis closed the laptop gently. "You don't have to prove anything?" "They do. and they just made a mistake. What mistake? You're out." He leaned forward. "They planned this so carefully, your collapse, your disappearance, the sedation, the timeline, but the one thing they didn't count on was you surviving long enough to see it." I sat back down, the exhaustion finally hitting me in full. "What now?" I asked. He reached for his phone. "I've already scheduled an independent neuropsych evaluation with Dr. Mireya Thorne, one of the best in the state. We'll get a certified mental competency report within 72 hours, and after that, we take the fight to them." I looked at him, the weight of everything finally sinking in. "They tried to erase me," I said quietly. "They almost did," Ellis replied. "But now, we turn the lights on." 3 days later, I sat outside courtroom 5B in downtown Portland with a pen in one hand and my pulse thudding in the other. The metal bench beneath me was cold despite the spring sunlight spilling in through the tall windows. Ellis stood a few feet away, reviewing papers with quiet intensity, occasionally glancing down at his watch. He'd offered to sit with me, but I needed the space. I needed to feel my body grounded, my breath steady, my name still mine. The competency hearing wasn't public, just a closed session with a probate judge, the opposing counsel, Ellis, and myself. On paper, it was a routine evaluation for a conservatorship challenge. But we both knew this wasn't routine. It was a power play. And the stakes were my life. I had spent the last 48 hours preparing for this, reviewing the forensic evaluation report from Dr. Mireya Thorne, who tested everything from my short-term memory to executive functioning to trauma response. Her results were impeccable, and she'd agreed to testify via affidavit that I exhibited no signs of delusion psychosis or cognitive decline. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that today wasn't going to go as planned. "Ready?" Ellis asked quietly, folding the last of the documents into a leather binder. I nodded. "Whatever happens," I said, "I won't be invisible again." He smiled faintly. "That's what they're afraid of." The courtroom itself was smaller than I imagined. Soft lighting, wood paneling, a raised bench for the judge, no jury box. Just 4 chairs on each side, a table, and a podium. On the opposing side sat a man in a navy suit, clean-shaven, corporate expression unreadable. I didn't know his name, but I didn't need to. He was just a tool. Sitting beside him was Genevieve. My stepmother turned slowly as I entered, eyes cool, lips slightly parted in mock surprise. She wore cream silk, and a string of pearls hair swept into her signature chignon. A widow's outfit in all but color. I kept walking, spine straight, heart ice cold. The judge, a silver-haired woman in her late 60s, entered promptly at 10 o'clock. She introduced the case file in a clipped, efficient tone, then invited both legal parties to present their statements. Ellis began calmly. He outlined the timeline of events, the undisclosed death of my grandmother, the attempt to institutionalize me without transparent cause, the forged prescription records, the toxicology report, the attempt to seize control of my inheritance under false pretenses. He presented Dr. Thorne's report and requested the court immediately dismiss any attempt at conservatorship, citing gross ethical violations and sustained psychological coercion. The opposing counsel countered smoothly, stating their concern was solely for Ms. Hale's well-being. He cited evidence of paranoid ideation, sudden behavioral changes, and my unauthorized departure from a wellness facility. Genevieve dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief like we were in a Hallmark courtroom movie. Then, the judge turned to me. "Ms. Hale, do you wish to speak?" I stood, and for a moment I just breathed. The words were in my chest, but I waited for them to settle, to take shape. "I'm not here to prove I'm sane," I said, "because sanity isn't a character you play, it's not a diagnosis you dodge, it's something you live through despite every effort to convince you otherwise." I looked at Genevieve. My stepmother made me tea every week for months, laced with small doses of benzodiazepines, enough to dull me, just enough to make me question my memory. She told me I needed rest, that I was spiraling. Then she helped place me in Evermere, where I was further drugged, silenced, and hidden. I wasn't grieving wrong, I wasn't delusional, I was inconvenient, and they needed me gone before the truth caught up. I turned back to the judge. My grandmother left me her entire estate not because I earned it, but because she trusted me, because I listened when no one else did, and because I never asked her to be anything other than herself. That legacy isn't just money. It's history. It's art. It's a life she wanted me to protect. I paused, then said clearly, I'm ready to protect it, starting now. The room went still. Even Genevieve dropped the handkerchief from her hand. The judge said nothing for a long time. She reviewed the documents again, asked a few measured questions, then said she would recess for 15 minutes before delivering a ruling. Ellis leaned in as we stood. You crushed that, he whispered. But I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Because just as we turned to leave the courtroom for the hallway, the door at the back opened and Silas walked in. His hair, longer than I remembered, his expression smoother. A tailored gray suit, pressed shirt, Rolex. He looked grown, polished, and completely unrecognizable from the boy who used to sneak cigarettes behind our grandfather's greenhouse. Apologies, Your Honor, he said, smoothly striding toward the front. I was delayed due to last-minute travel from Seattle, but I filed an emergency amendment on behalf of the Hale Family Trust. The judge looked annoyed. And you are Silas Hale, he said, Matilda Hale's grandson, and the co-trustee of her medical directive. Ellis's head whipped toward me. That wasn't true. Matilda never had a medical directive involving Silas. That position was mine, revoked only during the period when they declared me incapacitated. I stepped back into my chair, mouth dry. The judge accepted the document he handed over, quickly scanned the first page. Mr. Hale, she said, this filing contradicts several claims already under review. Yes, Silas said, voice calm. Because unfortunately the truth has been manipulated, and I have the recordings to prove it. He turned, finally looking at me fully. Rowena? He said with that infuriating, pitying half-smile. I'm sorry, but you've been fed a narrative that isn't just misleading. It's dangerous. For all of us. I gripped the edge of the table. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The room didn't feel real after the ruling. I heard the gavel. I saw Ellis's jaw unclench, his shoulders lower. But it was like my body hadn't caught up yet. I was still standing at the edge of a cliff my family had pushed me toward, and for the first time in months I hadn't fallen. But the hearing wasn't over. Not yet. Judge Sorrento cleared her throat. Before I close this session, Mr. Brewster, you mentioned earlier there was one final piece of evidence Ellis stood calm and measured. Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, we'd like to play a short audio recording. It was provided voluntarily by a licensed healthcare professional at Evermere Wellness Retreat. The judge nodded. Proceed. Ellis tapped his tablet. A small speaker on the desk crackled softly, and then came the voice. Familiar. Sharp. Honeyed and cruel. Genevieve. She's just agitated. Let her sign it while the meds are still in her system. She won't remember by morning. There was silence in the courtroom, dead. Silence. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Then a second voice. Unfamiliar male. Are you sure that's legal? Genevieve again, laughing softly. Oh, please, it's just temporary. We'll move the money to Silas's holding account, keep it safe until the lawyers finalize things. This is just paperwork. I looked across the aisle. Genevieve had gone pale. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table knuckles, white. Silas turned sharply toward her. You said it wasn't recorded, he hissed under his breath. She didn't answer. Ellis paused the audio. For the record, he said that clip was recorded 12 days ago by Ivy Rourke, RN, who risked her job and safety to expose this abuse. The full file contains 47 minutes of conversation between Mrs. Hale and staff at Evermere, detailing deliberate sedation-forged medical statements and unauthorized financial transfers from Matilda Hale's estate. The judge looked stunned. I'd like a copy submitted to the court and to the Office of Financial Integrity, she said quickly. Effective immediately, I'm suspending all access to estate accounts by either Mrs. Hale or Mr. Silas Hale, pending formal investigation. She turned to Genevieve and Silas. And if this recording proves accurate, criminal charges will likely follow. Genevieve tried to speak, but no sound came. The judge reached for her notes, but Ellis held up a hand. "There's one more item, Your Honor." She raised an eyebrow. Another recording, number a letter. He opened his leather briefcase and removed a small white envelope sealed with a wax stamp. Matilda's initials were pressed faintly into the seal. This letter, Ellis said, was left in my custody by Matilda Hale with strict instructions. It was to be opened only if a legal proceeding arose involving Ms. Rowena Hale's mental fitness or if any member of the Hale family attempted to interfere with the estate. The judge nodded. "Has it been authenticated I watched her seal it myself?" He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. The judge read silently for a long moment. Her face did not change, but something in the room did. She looked up, gaze level. "I'm entering this letter into the official court record." She cleared her throat and began reading aloud. "If this letter is being read, it means Rowena is in danger. I trusted her, not just with my money, but with my memory. I feared what Clive and Genevieve might do if they felt entitled to what they never earned. Do not give them control. Do not let them rewrite my legacy, and please, believe Rowena. She sees clearer than any of us ever could." The words rang like bells through the room. Clear, final, undeniable. Genevieve's mask cracked. She leaned toward Silas, whispered something urgent. But it didn't matter anymore. The lie had ruptured. The entire performance was in freefall now. The judge folded the letter, carefully set it beside her gavel, and looked back at me. "Ms. Hale," she said, "you have no further legal obligations to this court. You are free to go." I nodded once. My throat was tight, but I kept my chin up. As we turned to leave, Ellis placed a hand lightly on my back. "You did it," he whispered. "Matilda would be proud." But the truth was, I wasn't sure how I felt yet. Not proud, not victorious, just awake, fully awake. Outside the courthouse, Ivy was waiting. She wore jeans and a navy blazer, hair pulled back, expression guarded. When she saw me, her face softened. "You're out," she said. I nodded. "Thanks to you," she shook her head. "You were never broken, Rowena. You were just unheard." A sudden gust of wind pushed through the plaza, lifting a stray piece of paper into the air, fluttering like a loose page from a story that hadn't finished writing itself. I looked back at the courthouse at the door I'd just walked through and knew this was the part Matilda had prepared me for. The part where I stopped fighting for permission and started living with intention. It took 3 separate keys and 1 final signature from the estate executor before they would let me back inside the house. Matilda's house. It had been sealed for months pending the conservatorship proceedings that never should have existed. For all its warmth and memory, the place felt like it had been paused mid-breath, waiting for the right person to walk through the door. The air inside smelled faintly of cedar and dust and old books. And something else. Vanilla, maybe. Her scent still lingered in the fabric of the curtains, the leather of the armchairs, the polished keys of the baby grand piano in the parlor. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it until I was standing in the front hall again, fingers brushing the banister she used to grip every morning like clockwork. I walked slowly through each room, past portraits, stacked art crates, unopened mail, a blanket folded just so over the back of the couch. Everything was as she left it, as if she had only stepped out for tea. But it wasn't until I reached the piano bench that I felt it, that soft tug in my chest like memory calling out from under the weight of grief. I sat down, lifted the lid, and there it was. Not tucked in a folder, not labeled or sealed, just a cream envelope with my name written across it in Matilda's strong, looping script. And beneath it, a small black thumb drive taped gently to the inside of the bench. My hands shook as I peeled it off. Upstairs, in her old study, I slid the drive into her laptop, the one she used for everything from writing donation letters to editing her own poetry. The screen blinked once. A single file appeared for Rowena MPM4. I clicked play, and there she was, Matilda Hale, seated in that same worn armchair with the crocheted blanket across her lap. Her silver hair pinned up, like always her eyes clear and bright, filled with that mischievous kindness that had always made me feel seen. "Hello, little fox," she said, smiling softly. My throat tightened immediately. If you're watching this, then it means the people I warned you about did exactly what I feared they might. And it also means you're still standing, which doesn't surprise me at all. She leaned forward slightly, hands clasped in front of her. I want you to know something. I didn't leave you this estate as a prize. I left it as a safeguard, because I knew one day you might need not just money, but protection, leverage, options. She looked down, then back up. There's something else you should find with this drive, a letter. It's not instructions, it's not a will, it's me. The part I couldn't say aloud without making you feel like the weight of the family rested on your shoulders. I paused. The video opened the envelope and began to read. You were never meant to carry their shame. You were meant to carry forward what was good and real and soft in this world. I saw how they dismissed you, gaslit you, folded your strength into something they could ignore. But I saw you. The way you cared for patients. The way you mourned quietly after your mother died. The way you stayed kind in a house that did not reward it. You don't owe them forgiveness, Rowena. You don't even owe them acknowledgement. You owe yourself a life that isn't lived waiting to be proven right. I've left you what I could, the estate, the archives, the account marked Freedom Fund. But what I hope you carry forward is this, that you were always enough, that you were always mine. I didn't realize I was crying until I noticed the tear blot on the corner of the letter. I let the video play to the end, her voice like a balm over the bruises no judge could see. And if it helps. She added, I never trusted Clive. Not once. He was always too good at hiding behind words. Don't let that man rewrite you. She smiled, then bright and mischievous. And don't forget to tune the piano. I can hear it's already off. The screen faded to black. I sat there for a long time, holding the letter, listening to the silence of the house as if she might walk in at any moment with her mismatched earrings and that humming laugh. She was gone. But she'd never left me, not really. I stood, walked back to the piano, and for the first time in years played something slow, a little uneven, but familiar. Something we used to play together when I was 8 and she was still strong enough to sing. The notes echoed through the house like an answer, like a closing line. It took 4 months to unwind what they'd done. The estate, the bank transfers, the forensic audit, it all had to be rebuilt from scratch. Clive denied everything at first, claimed he was misled by, Genevieve said Silas acted independently, but the emails, the forged signatures, the falsified medical documents, they spoke louder than he ever could. By the end of summer, Clive had quietly resigned from his position at the university. No press release, no farewell luncheon, just an empty office and a name removed from the faculty directory. Silas wasn't as quiet. He tried to spin it, framed himself as a confused heir misled by grieving adults trapped in generational dysfunction. But the wire transfers didn't lie. The state opened a fraud case. His accounts were frozen. His luxury apartment in Seattle was put up for sale. His girlfriend left a week later. Genevieve simply vanished from public life. No calls, no messages, just silence. The last I heard, she'd moved to a gated community in Arizona and started attending spiritual retreats that promised energetic cleansing. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I wasn't watching their shadows. I was building something of my own. The first thing I did was sell all 3 properties Matilda's winter home in San Diego. The main beach house Clive tried to rent out for family and the artist's cottage in Vermont. I kept the Portland house. That one meant something. Then I launched the Matilda Foundation. It started small, a pilot program offering legal aid and recovery support to women wrongfully institutionalized by family members. But it grew fast. I partnered with Ivy, who became co-director. We gave workshops at hospitals, spoke on podcasts, worked with 2 journalists to expose patterns of medical coercion in high-asset families. People listened, and when they didn't, we got louder. I donated $500,000 to the Emergency Trauma Center where I used to work. We built a new mental health triage unit 1 that actually listened to patients. I hired back 2 nurses who'd been fired for whistleblowing. We named the new wing after Matilda. There were still hard days, flashbacks mostly to the locked doors, the fog in my head, the soft, patronizing voice of that therapist telling me I was disoriented. But on those days, I reread Matilda's letter, or played the video again, or sat at the piano and let the chords pull me back to something real. I wasn't trying to erase what happened. I was learning how to carry it without it crushing me. By late autumn, the Portland house felt like mine again. Not a museum, not a courtroom, not a battleground, just home. And one night, as the leaves turned and the first frost crept across the porch steps, I hosted a dinner. Not for business, not for legacy, for family. Ellis arrived first, holding a bottle of wine and a folder he refused to put down until dessert. Ivy brought candles, real ones, and a pie she said she baked herself, though we all suspected her girlfriend did it. Theo showed up to former Evermere patient, now a legal intern. He smiled more now. The house filled with music, clinking glasses, soft laughter. No one talked about the hearing, or the press, or the headlines that briefly floated online about the heiress who escaped a psychiatric trap. They just asked me if I'd tried that new Thai place on Hawthorne, if I still remembered how to cook chicken pot pie the way Matilda liked it, if I was happy. At one point, Ivy raised a glass. To Matilda, she said. We all followed, to the one who saw. Later, after everyone had left and the candles had burned low, I stood in the quiet kitchen and looked around the room. Sunflowers in a mason jar, mismatched plates, books stacked on the windowsill. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Clive, not even at Genevieve. They had tried to reduce me to a signature, a liability, a whisper in a padded room, but I'd rebuilt myself from the ruins they left behind. Not out of revenge, but out of clarity. They sent me away to erase me, but I returned to rewrite the ending. Now, the story was mine.